right.
So the meeting's called to order, and thank you, Medina. Please take the roll.
Thank you. Chair Willis,
Present.
Vice Chair Pease,
Present.
Board Member Bauer,
Present.
Board Member Eggleston Sislovich.
Present.
Sislovich. Thank you. Board Member Hendrick,
Present.
Board Member McKinnon,
Present.
Board Member Weimer, Board Member Weimer.
Here, did you hear me? Here.
Yes, I could hear you now. Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Medina. Would we like to adopt the resolution authorizing use of teleconferencing for Historic Resources Board during COVID-19 state of emergency? If everybody's read it, can we just get a motion to approve? Amy, is that kosher?
I believe so.
Okay, so I'm going to assume you all did your homework and read the resolution to allow us to have meetings via Zoom for another month. So do I have a motion to approve?
Motion.
Second.
Thank you, thank you. Do we need just a voice vote on this one?
Yeah, I will conduct a vote.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Willis,
Yes, aye.
Vice Chair Pease,
Yes.
Board Member Bauer,
Yes.
Board Member Eggleston Sislovich. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. It's
Board
just
Member
Levin. Yeah.
Sislovich. Board Member Eggleston Sislovich said yes. Board Member Henrik.
Yes.
Board Member McKinnon.
Yes.
Board Member Weimer.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. Do we have any oral communications from the public? I don't see any. So we'll move on. Agenda changes, additions, and deletions. I don't have any at this time. Okay. So we will keep that. So we can move on to city official reports and our schedule of meetings and assignments for the upcoming year. Amy, do you want to take that one?
Sure, although if you'd like, we can put that to the end after the agenda.
Okay. So
Excuse me.
we can move that one. So then, sorry, I couldn't give you guys a better retreat experience. I'm a little disappointed, but hopefully we can get a lot done and make up for that. So moving on to our retreat items. Amy, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I'm going to share my screen now. Good morning. I'm Amy French. I'm the Chief Planning Official, and joining me today for this retreat is our consultant, Christina Dicus, and so she can be consulted by the board and myself. This is our retreat agenda. In short, we have 2 parts, and they're displayed on the screen. If we need a 5-minute bio break, that's up to the chair and the board. This is the overview of the first part of our retreat. We're going to have a roundtable after I show just these first 2 slides. And then we'll launch into the conversation about the inventory and inventory update process, followed by part 2, when we will discuss the existing work plan and for 2021 that council already received last June, and the upcoming work plan for that is due to the council on April, in April of this year. And then if we have time, a brief showing of the preservation web pages to make sure that the public is aware of all the resources that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and go back a slide for member introductions, and I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see our faces.
Thank you. I'm going first. I think it's good to think about why we're here every once in a while. You know, we get started down a path and we don't always think about why we're here. I grew up on the East Coast, went to college on the East Coast, moved to Palo Alto in my 30s. And got to say, it took me a while to see the history here. But after a while, I was part of the first group of docents for past heritage. And I discovered some wonderful things. And it's really fun learning about Professorville and downtown and the people who started our utilities, being a public, you know, city-owned municipality, and you know, why I think Palo Alto from an early age, or from its conception, was just really unusual, and people looked at things differently. And I think it helps us explain why we've struggled sometimes along the way to change our path, and why Palo Alto is a really special place. So I think there's a lot of value in preserving our historic places, even though, you know, it's not the 1700s that we're preserving. So David, you want to follow me?
Sure. Sorry, I thought Kristen might be the next one, but I like to tell people that I lived in Palo Alto for 70 years. I'm no longer a Palo Alto resident because I moved to San Mateo, but I grew up with a lot of the Palo Alto history, both being developed and being removed. And my interest was sparked by my early training as a carpenter in San Francisco. I worked on restoring Victorian houses and ended up owning a house with my daughter in the Libertyville Historic District, and of course worked on many, many houses in Palo Alto as a general contractor. So I developed an appreciation and an understanding of historic properties and how to not only renovate them and repair them, but also how important it is and how valuable it is for us to have those buildings as part of our community. They're our history, and as every seminar I've attended since I've been on the board has confirmed, once it's gone forever. So you can have a picture, but it's not the same as having the real thing there. So that's what drives my interest and why I initially wanted to get on the board.
Thank you, David. Margaret?
Sure. I don't know. My computer's not awake yet this morning. Well, I definitely think it's so important, and it's so vital to our communities to retain the historic feeling. I mean, I'll repeat the same thing that you guys are saying, and how Palo Alto, that's what gives it its character and its charm, and it gives a real feeling of presence. And I went to college in Arizona, where everything, Arizona is a relatively new development. So every subdivision is just a cookie cutter repeat of whatever cheap building design that the developers can put up. So that was my surroundings. But when I was in college, I got the opportunity to work at Taliesin West at the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation for the summer between my junior and senior year, plus they kept me on my senior year. So I was surrounded by that history, and it really kind of took me a while to absorb what that meant, because it's so different and so unlike any other structure. So just being in that environment I think that kind of set that love for things that are old. And then moving to Palo Alto, starting to work on design and renovation of the older homes here. It's true, you can't replace it. And also you can't emulate it. Like, you can't build a new house that has the same character and feeling and quality of construction of the old houses. As hard as we try, I mean, the materials just don't exist, and the bones just aren't there. So I do feel like it's so important to preserve, where it's so easy these days. And a lot of times for contractors, it's easier for them just to rip out all those moldings and put new moldings in, because the time that it would take to carefully remove materials and restore them and put them back, it's time and it's money for the client. So sadly, I've also witnessed on many of my own projects where it's a losing game in some terms. But I think the secret is to have homeowners willing to preserve. I think that's the secret ingredient. If you have a homeowner that buys a house just for the property and the location, and they don't have that necessary level of understanding and respect, without that, your project's in jeopardy. But I try.
Thank you.
I try as hard as I can.
Christian?
Well, whether it's a culture or nation state, I think even at a community level, history is what allows us to coalesce and have cohesion together. I prefer it as the real deal in reality, but in the absence of that, particularly in current times, I would take it in the historic record as well. It's not the same, but it's better than nothing. That's the extent of my contact. After what everybody else has said, it's hard to articulate much more value beyond what they've mentioned already.
Oh, thank you. Mike, you've been at this longer than any of us.
Yes, I have. It's my career started out here about 1997 when I came to Palo Alto as a job transfer from another NASA center in Cleveland, Ohio. I was offered the job as chief of the planning office at NASA Ames, and dealing with all the newly acquired Navy historic properties, the Shenandoah Historic Plaza, and given the task of what do we do with this? NASA was given the stewardship of the Navy's properties, and I got interested in the adaptive reuse possibilities, and I think that really was a gold mine as far as reusing some of the properties. We put Carnegie Mellon into some of the buildings out there, and did a lot of restoration of derelict buildings that I thought would never see the light of day. And that led into the reuse of the hangars. We got quite a bit of interest in preserving the three hangars that are out at Moffett Field, and all the planning work associated with that. And that involved a lot of work with the State Historic Preservation Office, crafting agreements that would be enforceable by law on how we treat these properties, and doing the statements of work, the adaptive reuse guidelines for all the buildings in the Shenandoah Plaza Historic District. And about that same time, I think Dennis Backlund called me and said, "Hey, Mike, I'm leaving the board on City of Palo Alto Historic Resources Board. You might be interested in applying for it." So I picked up in his queue and applied for it, and got it involved as essentially Dennis Backlund's replacement on the Historic Resources Board back around 1998, I think it was, maybe 97, 98. And that has continued much longer than I ever anticipated. It's been an enjoyable ride. I think I'm on my last stint here. I'll be termed out here shortly, but I hope to bring some of the experiences and knowledge that I've gained working with adaptive reuse and putting some of the older structures into modern use and still preserving the historic integrity of these buildings. So I thought the opportunity to work in Palo Alto was an interesting opportunity. So that's kind of my background. I'm not a historian by training. My background is a mechanical engineer, but I got reconverted into a historic preservation officer some point in time.
Well, thank you. And thank you for saving Moffett Field for us. We appreciate it. Go.
Morning. I'm an architect. I grew up in Redwood City, and so I know Palo Alto and the entire peninsula pretty well. I went to UC Berkeley, so I haven't left the peninsula or the Bay Area for very long. I did a 5-year stint in Denver, Colorado. But other than that, my early career started in Palo Alto with John Boyd Architects, John Cole Architect, Sigrid Rupp Architect, and Gentry and Associates. But the majority of my career has been as a project manager at the San Francisco International Airport. So I've always been interested in Palo Alto and its residences. And so when the opportunity came up about, I guess maybe 10 years ago now, the Professorville Guidelines Committee, I was on the initial committee on that to start looking at the different houses in Professorville and categorizing those and writing up some of the guidelines, which have since been changed and adapted and are now the official Professorville Historic Guidelines. So I'm happy to be a part of that. So anyway, I think it's important that we keep the history of Palo Alto. It's always been a very charming city. Having grown up in Redwood City, it's such a big contrast because I grew up on nurseries when Redwood City had a lot of agricultural districts or zones. And so seeing how housing has just kind of sprouted up and seeing the different types of housing, it's nice to see that we can keep some of the old historic structures.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have our newest member, Alyssa.
Hi, it's nice to meet all of you. So this is my first meeting. I'm new. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Palo Alto, actually. I graduated from Gunn High School. I attended Stanford. And so I felt like I really grew up with the history of the area. And it was something I always enjoyed. I am now actually working in historic preservation, like as my day job. I'm an art conservator. I work with the conservation of three-dimensional objects. I'm actually the conservator for SFO museums. So I work at San Francisco International Airport. But I've also worked at the DeYoung Museum and the California Palace of the Legion of Honor and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I did my graduate work in New York City, so I got the opportunity to experience the historic resources of the East Coast for a while, and then moved back to California. I also have an MBA from UC Berkeley. I have recently moved back to Palo Alto. I'm really enjoying being back. I also live in a Category 2 home. So I'm having the homeowner experience as well. And I really agree with what I've heard from everybody about the importance of preserving historic resources. That the original has things to show us and teach us that can't necessarily be substituted. And that it's something that really enhances not only our understanding of the past, but our life now. So thank you. And I really look forward to meeting all of you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, great to hear a little bit about everybody. So thanks. And Amy, you want to take us on?
Sure, here I go. So our first topic for the first part of this retreat is regarding our inventory. And these are the local inventory for the city of Palo Alto, 511 properties that are on the master list, which is on the city's webpage, and those were updated in 2012. So we have the need to update that list because there have been changes. And I did a quick look at how many of these properties on the inventory that we have are category 3s and 4s, which are the less protected or not protected by our existing historic preservation ordinance, at least when they are outside of the 2 historic districts, Professorville and Ramona historic districts, where we do have categories 3s and 4s, but we also have them, and we do have categories 3s and 4s in the downtown. Those are also protected, I should say. But this is not quite half of those on the list. One of the things that we need to do is to update that master list on our webpage to note the absence or the demolition of the Juana Briones home, which occurred after 2012, as well as there have been some category 3 and 4 homes that have been demolished, again, because they are not protected by the ordinance. And then there have been some homes that are demolished by fire or neglect and are no longer in existence. So there are some other needs for updates to that inventory, which include upgrades to properties. There are several properties here. I put some examples here that were category 3 properties that are now category 2 properties due to council action and HRB support. And then just to note that, this was a 1978 survey and it's been many years. So there may be some properties out there that are, no longer fitting the category they're in, categories 1 through 4, but we have not done a survey of those properties. And then I'll just say for the, as far as inventory updates, we do have a section of our code, the preservation ordinance, and I show some of that here that give us the roadmap to updating the inventory or designating properties as historic resources. And so, in a nutshell, the owners are the ones typically that would reach out and submit the required documents. And then we would take it to the Historic Resources Board, who would make a recommendation. And then the council can have that on their consent calendar to approve, take the nomination and recommendation of the board and put a property on the local inventory. These are the criteria for designation on the inventory that appear in the code. Everyone has been emailed this presentation and can take the time to look at those. They're online as well, of course. So as far as when we talk about the next steps for any elevation of properties to the inventory and districts, actually, because the inventory, the 1998 to 2000 survey that was performed identified potential districts, and the city has never taken that up as a potential project. So one of the things that we talk about each year is the availability of these grants from the Office of Historic Preservation. If we submit an application for a grant to take up a project, of course, that requires city funding and city resources, so that have not been identified. So one thing, though, is that because the council in December noted that they would like to understand what's needed to update our local inventory, that's a step that needs to take place to provide to them so that they could authorize funding and resources for that activity. Even without that, we have begun a project led by the chair to verify the existence of those properties identified in 1998 survey as National Register eligible. So that was included in the packet, a document, attachment A to the report that shows the progress thus far and ongoing. And you'll see, if you haven't looked at it, that there have been some demolitions off that list. An important aspect is our work plan. We have a work plan now that does not include implementation of this comprehensive plan program that was established in 2017, at the end of 2017, which is to place the National Register eligible properties on the city's local inventory. We have not begun that process. So again, we would need to get that as a priority from the council, get it on a work plan, and get the resources. So in any case, one of those aspects would be to do outreach to property owners regarding their eligible properties. Again, we have those 165, around 11 have been demolished according to the chart that Chair Willis has embarked upon. We have an additional 16 or more California Register properties, eligible properties, that we staff has on a case-by-case basis studied. So this is just the page 1 of Chair Willis's table in your packet. I think I can let her take up a conversation on this effort that she's embarked upon with the board. I think that's that. Chair Willis, if you would like to share any of the pages of your inventory, let me know, but I'm going to get out of this. So again, I can see faces.
Thank you.
Okay.
So one question, I bet we all have questions after that, but one question I have is, what is the process for, if a building's been demolished, what's the process for taking it off the inventory? Does that need to go to council?
I don't believe that's enumerated in our code. If,
okay.
It's off because it's gone is kind of.
So when we talk
an
about
administrative
changes,
task.
yeah. Okay. And then another question I had was, do you know roughly the size of the state grants that are available?
The amounts?
Yeah.
I think it depends on the projects. Every year they have the opportunity to dole out the funding based on the grant applications.
I just thought they might have a sort of range or max. Christine, is that something maybe?
Yeah, I would say they often range between $25,000 to $50,000. Often it's not quite enough to cover the full project, so then the city would do some kind of matching program to supplement what's provided.
We did this for the Professorville guidelines that Paige and Turnbull helped us with. So the city contributed in kind, staff services as well to help with that project with the grant from the OHP.
So speaking of, I feel like we're a little short-staffed. I know we had this conversation in regards to having twice monthly meetings. I know it's probably hard for you to talk to. Maybe there's somebody better I should talk to, but I feel like we could use more support from the city just generally overall. No?
I agree.
Mayor about that one. So I feel pretty good about the way the inventory survey is going. I don't really have a plan for outreach, but I'd love to come up with one today. Somebody could help with that. But I think the piece that I'm really missing is the mapping, because what we see is that if it's in a district and it's a 3 and 4, which a lot of those 3 and 4s are probably actually 1 and 2s of the original inventory. I think that we can't protect them. I don't even understand why we're not at least reviewing those. I don't see anything in the code that says we shouldn't review. I think that probably is also time and staffing issue, that we don't see the 3s and 4s outside of our historic districts. But I feel like our best bet, and I also feel like the strongest story, you know, I like my stories, is to have a district. So I think that for me, if we put all our inventory on the map with our National Register eligible properties, and that I think it would give us a strong sense of maybe what districts might be the strongest and most important to us and might have the most intact story. So anybody else have comments on Amy's presentation?
I do. 2 things. One, in reviewing the list of properties, a couple just popped out at me, like 567 Hale, which was Debbie Shepherd's house, and 1023 Forest. These are houses that seem to me are eligible, but they're not here. They're not 3s and 4s. I think Debbie's house would be a 2. So is this only 3s and 4s?
The list that,
In our packet?
oh, wait. So the list that I did is only the properties that are not on the inventory. None of them
Okay.
are on our inventory.
I see. So
So
those.
these
those
are all
two- yeah.
ones that were identified roughly 20 years ago by Page and Turnbull, like, no, Dames and Moore.
Correct.
As, sorry, as eligible for the National Register. So this is
Okay.
a whole new set.
Sure. So in following up on your suggestion that we figure out a way to approach homeowners, Amy, can you remind us what the incentives are for being listed? Isn't there a daylight plane exemption or some kind of easement and also a floor area ratio forgiveness, or I'm not sure how you describe this.
There are a number of incentives which are found on our webpage, excuse me, and they range from, as you said, floor area ratio. We have this home improvement exception process that acknowledges the value of retaining the existing home by giving away floor area above the maximum that would be for non-historic homes. And that applies to categories 1 through 4, where they occur in the city. We have other, we have other incentives that include historic preservation incentive for subdivision incentive for historic preservation. So we've had a number of those properties. They have subdivided where there are 2 existing homes, one of which is historic on our inventory. And they have subdivided the properties so that they have a flag lot where a flag lot is otherwise not allowed by our zoning code and subdivision ordinance. And then there are other incentives that are basically, they can use the historic building code to not meet current California building code requirements if they are historic. Those are just several of the incentives. We also have, of course, in the downtown, the bonus floor area that a commercial building can achieve with historic rehabilitation. We have a number of projects that took advantage of that program. It used to be that those transferable development rights came with parking spaces. That was done away with. So it became less of an incentive at that point. But there have been a number of projects that have used the TDR, transferable development rights, in the downtown.
My sense at looking at the incentives, it would serve us well to separate them out by who they're available to, like the downtown ones, commercial ones in a bucket. So they, when somebody's looking for their incentives, they don't just see all the ones that don't apply to them. they see the positive part. So, if we just had, a category that was, all of our inventory buildings and a category that's our 1 and 2s, I think it might serve us well to, and I think we do want to start working on how to publicize our incentives, and maybe we get past, or the Historic Association to do a meeting with us, and we could share these things. And I have a feeling some of those people might have additional ideas of how to get that information out to the community.
I think non-conforming placement on a property is also available to historic. It's really available to everyone, but I think there's some advantage if you're an historic property as well. I think the reason I asked for this is that this information is that so many people are afraid of historic designations. They think for some reason that that's going to limit the value of their properties. And so the value, which is really a driver in terms of how property is developed in Palo Alto or anywhere in the Bay Area for that matter, has to be offset by the advantages of not demolishing and building back bigger and in current environment, more units on a property, which is another thing that we haven't even, the ordinance doesn't even begin to address. So,
yeah, I had a couple ideas I'd like to bring forward. I think what we need to do is to mount a marketing program to the public that tells them really what the advantages are of historic preservation. I agree with David's assessment that people view this as a detriment and a negative that's going to pull down their home values and cause them lots of grief. But I think we need an aggressive marketing program similar to what is done in Pasadena through Pasadena Heritage. And I think that's been very successful in convincing the general public that there is a place for historic preservation that will provide value to their own personal properties and not provide encumbrances on what they can do and cannot do. I think that a lot of people feel this is just a big roadblock to them and it's going to cause them a lot of grief dealing with historic preservation regulations. So I think a marketing program of some sort needs to be crafted that we can put out.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's time to start putting out the positive side and also just awareness. I mean, I think we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it in the community. And I think it's been a conversation that went poorly 20 years ago and nobody's really been excited about talking about it since. So I'd love to see that turned around. And I think, marketing plan is a great way to frame it. I think, if we reach out to, Bill Johnson and our local sources, we should be able to get some help with that.
Yeah, we need to get somebody skilled in marketing to kind of put the package together and make some sense to the general public.
Well, great. If you have any suggestions or anybody has any suggestions on somebody who would do that, let me know. But I do feel like if we went out to the Historic Association and Past Heritage, that we might find our marketing guru.
I wanted to quickly ask about your list. These are properties that are just deemed eligible, right? So this is sort of a list that we are hopeful to add to our actual inventory.
Yes.
Is that correct? So, and then I know we're also talking about incentives, but I also know that a lot of the incentives that were just mentioned, like daylight plane and floor area bonus, those are all come into play when someone wants to remodel or alter their house. So it's almost, I think what we're looking at now is coming up with some kind of incentive to get these people to be on the inventory. And I know that we can identify them and say that they're eligible, but how do we go from being eligible to actually being on the inventory? So, and that kind of touches on something that we were talking about last time about when there's one of these homes that are eligible, deemed potentially eligible, and then that homeowner wants to do some kind of an alteration or remodel, that designation that they're deemed potentially eligible triggers them to have to do a historic evaluation.
Margaret, so I had this trouble too, Amy will tell you, but these are not the ones that are potentially eligible. These are houses, and okay, when they were surveyed, they were not just potentially eligible, they were eligible for the National Register. So we have a whole nother list that's potentially eligible.
Oh, I
but
see.
The research has been done. Yes, we've lost a few. Some have been altered in a way that maybe makes them not no longer eligible. But their statuses, they should, if we wanted to, we could put them all on the national register. Then we're just asking for these houses to go on our inventory. And I think one of the big decisions is going to be, what category are there? There are more bonuses, more advantages to being a 1 or 2. And I think because I sort of started on the, let's just call them all 4s. But now I'm thinking maybe, you know, if they're not just state eligible, they are national register eligible. So I think that there is some advantage to, you know, putting them all on it as 2s, unless they're obviously 1s, which I think, you know, I'm thinking the water tower is a 1.
So my other question to that was what's the process of going from their current status to being on the register status? Like, what does that step involve?
So Christina, is that something you could answer for us, or is that out of your wheelhouse?
Is Amy still on?
Yes.
I am. So
Okay, you might have a better idea than.
Yeah, it's in our zone, in our chapter 1649 historic preservation ordinance. What is needed to put any property on the city's local inventory? And I had a few slides that I presented already on that. So it requires you know, an application, and it requires Historic Resources Board you know, recommendation and council action, and council can approve nominations and placement on the inventory on consent calendar. So they don't have to actually have a public hearing on the matter.
So in the most streamlined case, we could nominate properties that we would then need to notice it in a newspaper that we had nominated them. I'm just talking about the ones where the research and the documentation's already been done, because I know that's a big one, but all that has already happened. And then it could go to council. Is that one scenario, the quickest scenario? Not necessarily the most diplomatic, but.
Doesn't the homeowner or the property owner have to be involved? I mean, you can't just nominate someone and have it put on.
I don't think it says that. It says anybody can nominate, doesn't it? That's what I read.
Anyone can nominate, but the council would not place on the inventory a property against the property owners. You know, if property owners voice their objections, the council's not going to put it on the inventory. So I think part of this is with your marketing campaign you're talking about, is to help people understand, as staff does daily for these questions, we do not have jurisdiction over the interior of a home. Any remodeling in the inside of a home is not subject to our review for historic, you know, Secretary of Interior standards compliance. We're only talking about the exterior of the home. I think the other thing that, you know, we are constantly letting people know is you can add on to a historic home. You have to do it in a way that's compatible with the Secretary of Interior standards. Many times adding to the back of a home is the way to go for people, because the character defining features are often more on the front of the home, or, you know, near the front. And these are things that, you know, we talk about with Christina often, because we do have remodels and, you know, exterior additions to category 3 and 4 homes. And as long as they're compliant with Secretary of Interior standards, they're fine to modify, and it doesn't change their designation on our inventory to add on. So I think there's misinformation out there. If once you're on the category 1 through 4, you know, you can't touch the inside or the outside, and that's a misinformation.
Excuse me, is there, for an owner of a property who's open to being listed, is there a cost?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the fee as well, because that seems like it would disincentivize participation.
There is a fee, and I don't know what it is offhand. I think it's on the lower end, a flat fee. You know, we have the ability to have our consultant work with us on these things, but this is one of the, if we take the whole entire list of National Register eligible homes and place that on the inventory, that's a work that's unfunded, and we aren't resourced to do that.
So
But we need to-
also, if we were looking at, we know there are a lot of objections out there, and there's a lot of misinformation, but and if we were going to talk about outreach or marketing, for example, if we were just to look at residential properties and the ones that we're chasing down that have never been put on a list that we're currently doing, I mean, it seems to me you have to think about who your audience is and who you're trying to persuade. It's a big difference between somebody who's an owner occupier of a house that's historic versus somebody who's a small landlord. They have 1 or 2 or 3 properties that they rent out, some of which may be historic qualified, versus a commercial landlord who has multiple units. And it seems to me the mix of incentives and disincentives is going to be different for each of those categories of people. So I'm just trying to get a handle on how we might start. There's a lot of good information and questions here, but it seems to me you have to kind of test some of this out in terms of how much effort's involved, how effective it is, and what the cost of actually doing it is. Because in Amy's slide, typically the owner is asking, we're really trying to create an environment where we can ask, somebody can ask, and they can be open to considering it.
I'm wondering if we can start by sending out a blanket letter to our 150 or whatever is left on the National Register eligible property list, and just asking if they're interested in being on the inventory. And that kind of feedback, I would think, would give us a lot of information. And we could, I'm sure we get some, mostly because I have one. But I feel like that might be a place to start. But I think we need to address the fees. I mean, I don't know what we call inconsequential, but I think that there is a community benefit to having an inventory. I don't really think being on the inventory, I don't want to just look at it as advantages to homeowners, which is great, but I think it's primarily an advantage to the community, that whoever owns it is probably not going to have, well, I don't know, been in my house 30 years, but you know, a lot of properties turn over and have a lot of owners. And I think that, you know, only takes one to get rid of it. And I believe strongly that, you know, we shouldn't take people off this list, but we should go for the low fruit first, and we should make it as low as possible. So, you know, if we need to find the funding for those fees, Amy, let us know. But I feel like I don't want to ask them for anything except permission to be on the inventory for all the right reasons, all the best reasons.
Also, if I could comment, the elephant in the room here is the fact that there isn't a single Eichler house that's included in this list that I could see. And all there are 25, Christina knows the number better than I do, but there are between 25, 2,700 Eichler houses in Palo Alto, the largest, if I remember correctly, the largest group of Eichlers anywhere in the world. And we're not even addressing that. So those houses, all those houses now qualify because they're between probably 50 and 70 years old. So good idea, Carolyn, to start with figure out the program for what we have on this list, and then be able to just ramp it up to all of the qualifying houses, which we haven't even inventoried yet.
I'm looking for a manageable approach. But good point on the Eichlers, because I think about them being in the historic district. They're, well, not all of them, obviously, but I think about having Eichlers in a historic district and that giving us some degree of protection, but I guess there's not a lot of incentives. Again, got to divide up those incentives by, you know, who they apply to, because for me, it's just, the way my mind works, I don't keep them straight when I go through, you know, the list that applies to this group and that group and this group and that group. So I'm starting to move that project up in my head about something we should look at maybe sooner rather than later. But I think that identifying which incentives apply to which properties would be a good one. And maybe that goes along with our mapping, you know, that there's probably some correlation there.
Chair Willis, if I could just say the Eichler conversation and other properties that are over 50-year-old that did not show up in the survey of 1998 for the reason that they weren't 50 years old at that time. That should be another conversation for another day. We have a lot to get to this agenda. The other thing that you asked was to let you know if there's a way to waive the fees, and there is, and it's a council can waive fees. That's what's in our code.
Oh, good.
But you know, that would take a request to council.
Okay, so a memo to council is definitely appropriate, right? And I guess that maybe what we want to end up with the end of today is what we want to put in that memo. What do we want to ask council for? What's our first step? And when
I
is
would remind us that the work plan is the vehicle to alert the council of what the work plan is. Currently, this is not on the 2021 work plan. So we have an opportunity to discuss the 2022 work plan, which is due to the council in April. And that's in our second part of this retreat today.
So along those lines, is it worth asking to amend the 21-22 work plan so that we could actually get some support before the summer? Doesn't it shift in like June or July? When's the end of it's a school year more than a calendar year, right?
Yeah, I mean, last year they asked for our work plans in June. This year they're asking for them in April, and it already is 2022. So I think it's appropriate to focus on a 2022 work plan since we're already in the year. Again, we should probably talk about it in the next part of the retreat. I'm wondering if there's any other discussion from other board members on the first part of the retreat.
This seems like moving on from this particular question right now. We really haven't been able to gel it very much. I think we're all agreed on outreach of some kind. We don't know how it's going to be paid for. We don't know how to do it. So is there a way before we depart this meeting today to put a little bit more flesh on the bones here about how we might move forward? We started to confirm this list. It seems like it's low enough hanging fruit to me, unless somebody knows some fruit that's hanging even lower. And it also seems to me that, for example, if you were to say we're going to look at people who are owner occupiers of houses that we think are qualified, we want to go to them, I would start out by going to people who've already done it and asking them for testimonials about why they wanted to do that. So we have some, we can convey to potential homeowners who would participate that others have done it and there are reasons why they did it and it didn't seem to harm them, as well as providing at least some basic ideas of how it works and what the incentives are that are in place for them to do it, what it means and what it doesn't mean, kind of thing.
So Christian, when you say people who have done it, are they people, because I can't think of anybody that's just said, oh, I want to put my house on the inventory and done it. Amy, can you?
Are there any examples out there in the last 10 years of people who have approached the city and done this proactively?
No, there are cases of commercial properties in the downtown that requested to upgrade categories to take advantage of the incentives and also to beautify their building that was in transition from one tenant to the next, such as the Toy and Sport World on Waverly. And you know, that's an example of a project that was noticed by PAST and given an award. And so that's nice to have an award program, which we that's another conversation for another day. But the examples that I can think of are category upgrades and removal of the inventory for some homes that have fallen into disrepair, severe disrepair.
Okay, so there are examples of people who requested upgrades and that are not commercial properties. Is that correct?
Right, if they had a 3
No.
and they wanted to be a 2, so they could take more advantage.
Are there literally no examples of commercial residences since this inventory was taken, 98, 2000, of people who approached the city or otherwise brought their property into some register, some list?
I think part of the issue is that when the inventory was initially done, it was a city project, that they did it and they identified these properties. And I don't think most people see it as something that they should go and ask for, that they feel like they are either designated that way or not designated that way. I think in some regard, they're relying on us to tell them that, yes, you have a property we value and that we would like to have on our inventory. And I don't think it occurs to people, including me, to ask to be put on the inventory.
Yeah, another thought I had is that might be of some benefit if we could ever pull it off, is to conduct a survey of the public in the city of Palo Alto to see what their feelings are on some of these topics, to give us some guidance on what direction we're going in, if we're going in following the wrong road here to implement some of these programs. I think we need to get an idea what the public really feels, maybe through a survey.
I think that's spot on, but I don't think it's a broad net cast. I think you have to narrow it down. I think before we go out and try to promote an idea, we better get some idea beyond our intuitive and anecdotal experience that people are scared of a historic designation because they think it's going to adversely affect the economics of it. It's often their most important and largest personal asset.
Yeah, that's the feeling I'm getting when I've talked to.
But you can't survey the whole city. I mean, I think we can.
No, you can do a spot survey though. You can do selective survey.
Yeah, something more selective.
Yeah.
And test it a little bit. I mean, that's how this work gets done. And especially since our resources are modest, I would rather ask the council for a modest amount of money to do something to prove a concept than to put a big plan in place that I don't think we really can defend based on any facts.
Isn't there some kind of a mailing list or we should come up with a mailing list of the people who are on the inventory? People, I mean, I always thought it would be great if, and I know that Stanford Heritage kind of does this with the newsletter, but I think they only do that to people who are members. But let's make our own club of people who are on the list and put out a newsletter coming from the HRB, from the city of Palo Alto. Hey, you're on the list. Your house is valuable to us. And start this dialogue about, wow, you're so lucky you have this amazing resource. We just want to be in contact with you. If you have any questions, reach out to us. Let's start doing that. And then they'll start seeing this newsletter and they'll think it's a real thing. I mean, we are a real thing, but they'll maybe that's sort of an invitation to them to be, a lot of them probably don't even think about it. Everyone's so darn busy in this area. People don't think about their designation of their house or the age of their house. They're too busy working like the rest of us. But maybe like just a nice newsletter that starts small, from, our own Xerox copy makers, whatever. And then maybe it could grow into something. And I could even envision us having you're invited to come down to City Hall and we have a question and answer period about what is it like to have a historic house, and start creating this community of people where they can even talk to each other. We could have, now we have COVID, but maybe if COVID ever ends, we could entertain. What if we just even have 5 people show up? That's a success. Like, let's build on this idea. And then I'm really good about coming up with ideas, but they're hard to execute. But I'm also thinking this fundraising problem that we have no money, right? What I would love the idea of having a home tour. I have one in my neighborhood. I live in the Rose Garden neighborhood, and every year they have this home tour, and thousands of people pay money to go on this tour. And the tour, it benefits a Catholic school in the area. But darn it, people want to see these houses. And like, I go to these tours and these houses are like, I wouldn't even put this house on the tour if it was I mean, because I see a lot of houses, so I want to see something so amazing. But it's so cute and it's sweet, and people decorate their kids' rooms, and it's just adorable. But these people make bank on this home tour, and it's every year. And I know that would be a committee and an effort beyond our means with our small committee, but what an amazing idea. Let's have a Palo Alto historic home tour. We get some people who are actually willing to put their house on the tour. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I kind of think it's a really good idea.
Well, Margaret, I have to ask,
I like
have you
that.
not been on a past house tour before?
Yeah, Past has 6.
I've done some good
I'm
ones.
sorry. See, I'm too late to the party. I can help.
Let
Was
me,
past done it recently? Because I don't.
well, it's, I'm on the Past board. The pandemic has not helped because we couldn't be together. But at our last meeting last Wednesday, we did review the tours. They're going to start back up, I think, in the fall. That's typically when they occur. There are 6 or 7 now that are pretty well established. They're not often offered every year, all of them, but they're available. I'd like to also tell you an experience that Past had last year when they got a cease and desist letter from an attorney demanding that their client's house be removed from Past's website, and any information that would suggest it was historic be taken down, or the Past would be sued. It was kind of a shock to us to have somebody, feel that strongly, but this attorney, I mean, we just took it down because Past is a public service, but it was really astounding how threatening and angry the whole thing was. And that's part of what we're going to have to deal with. It's the misinformation and frightening consequences, according to some homeowners, of being designated historic. When we did the Eichler Historic District, not Historic District, design guidelines, there was a Eichler homeowner who came to the council and was vehement about not creating a district, not doing anything about this because it would ruin his property values. And he hit me with emails for 2 months after that meeting telling me how wrong I was that historic designation increases value. And he came up with the most esoteric, weird ways in which property values had gone down. Not here, New York City, for instance. Anyway, sorry to go on, but.
Well, Dave, while we're talking about it though, Past no longer does the holiday house tour.
No, they haven't done that for a while.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
I think that's more what Margaret was talking about, and maybe that is an opportunity because we probably could use the Past membership to operate it. It is very people intensive, but we could organize it and get the houses and do the primary work and just need people day of and around that. So
Yeah.
that would be something I would think about, because it was a great event. It was a really community building event too, that not just, see all your people that were interested in preservation, you get to see the houses, you'd see your neighbors. We don't do a lot of that in Palo Alto. We're pretty isolated. So I think there's multiple reasons that might be a really good event for us. I also think Preservation Week is another opportunity for us. And I'm hoping that in March, we can put together some public outreach events for
Bo
preservation.
Crane developed a downtown walking tour of historic tech company locations.
Whoa,
And I was with him on that tour as, you know, his second in command. But it's astounding the number of tech companies, Facebook, Google, Intuit, and many others, Apple, all started in downtown Palo Alto buildings. And those are just the three big ones that I can remember, but it's pretty impressive tour. And we were asked to create it by a company, a foundation in Palo Alto that brought tech people together and wanted to give them a sense of how the tech industry developed here in Palo Alto. So those tours are available, and PAST is a good service group for that. I don't think we need to recreate that experience. The holiday tour, Carolyn, I think you're talking about, was in people's houses where you got to go in and see them. That's not done anymore because obviously nobody wants that in the pandemic experience. But
no, not the pandemic.
and people eventually pushed back and just didn't want to be included, and then there weren't enough houses. So that's where that died.
What about doing an Eichler? Since there's so many Eichlers, maybe we do an Eichler tour or an Eichler day, Palo Alto Eichler day. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do think I think these are grandiose ideas that probably are beyond our skill set. But I do think just sort of a homespun newsletter would be, I've always thought that would be a great, 4 times a year, Palo Alto historic newsletter.
I
to reach
think
out
that-
to the homeowners and just start a dialogue and say we're here. They probably aren't aware of it.
Yeah, I think that I was approached when I'd been on the board for like a month by a high school student who wanted to do some kind of project. And I think maybe a newsletter or a blog might be a really good thing that we could, maybe we need a list of volunteer projects when somebody does ask, we'll have an answer for, because I didn't have one then. I want to say welcome to Tom Dubois. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your presence and support.
Thanks.
Um,
I think there's a big difference between inviting people to go look at somebody else's house that's a historic structure and registered, and asking somebody to put their own property on that list.
It's true. I want to sort of refocus this back on, an inventory update before we move on to the work plan.
But we're working on that update. It seems to me we ought to build on that and do some kind of sample here. Go to some people, line our ducks up, have our facts, have our draft value proposition, if you will, and run it by them and hear what they have to say about it. We have little time, small resources, and a big job to do here. And we've already started it. So I just think if we can concentrate as much wood behind one target, that would be a good way to proceed, since we've already started going out and validating that these houses are still there and not been torn down.
So Christian, if we start by a letter to these property owners and we target exactly which incentives might apply to their properties, is that meet your thoughts? Does that mesh with your thoughts?
I was thinking if we could identify them and even contact them by letter and no phone and have an initial conversation over the phone that we've structured, we're going to learn something that we're not going to learn by taking these other paths, which seem to me well-intentioned, but a shotgun approach. And I think the challenge is too big to take a shotgun approach. I think we need to generate something more factual in order to get the support we want, in order to really have an outreach to build that inventory up, to get more and more structures listed. Seems to me that's our key goal here.
It is. I just think I think there's gonna be some people that just say, great, thanks. And then those are the people that we go back to and have conversations with and say, why, you know? I just think somehow we need to get started. And I think it's great to have, you know, a process, but I'd like to see the process as smooth and as not, you know, just be able to execute as quickly as possible. And I think a letter we could do without a lot of staff support. I'd be really surprised if you sent that letter out and you got nothing back. I would think a lot of people think, why isn't my house on the inventory? You know, it's wonderful and it's old and it's got great stories. You know, what's the matter with the city that they didn't put it on the inventory? And I don't think they think that, well, we haven't upgraded it since 2012 or actually 1979, like the reality. I think we, at least I would like to see us push forward and try and get some initial positive movement and use that to keep going.
Well, yeah, I'd like to point out that when we had staff support, and I'm not talking about Amy, actually had a historic planner, we actually got some of these things done. The large portion of the Mills Act plan, which we're trying to finish up for our next meeting, was done with staff help. Met with us, wrote it up in a way that would qualify, or I should say in the format required to present it to the council. And when that person left, we never got another staff person. It's very hard to get anything done without some kind of staff help.
I think Tom has his hand up, so maybe we should let him. Not that I know how to do that. Do we have an administrator who can respond to a hand?
He is unmuted, so he can speak,
Oh,
as
okay.
far as I can tell. If
Well,
you want to call on him.
Tom, did you have something to say, or was that just a little hand raised by accident? Okay, I'm gonna say I misread that one. Never mind.
I see
One
that
thing
you
I
also called from a phone. So
Hmm.
it's *6 to unmute. Maybe this will help.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I see a phone icon near Tom's name.
If we want to also, I have a thought, because we do have Christina Dykes here, who's with Page and Turnbull, and she has vast experience with other communities and how they've launched into putting properties on an inventory or register. And if you have questions of her, or if she wants to give an overview of her sense of Palo Alto and what's available as far as kicking
Can
something
you guys
off.
hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I was having problems, and I just wanted to say I had a work issue this morning. I wanted to join you guys earlier, and it sounds like you've already been talking about updating the historic register, and I just wanted to weigh in. I had been the liaison for a couple of years, several years back. I really do think it's time that we updated that register. And I thought what Christian was saying about trying to really focus and see if you can get that done, that made a lot of sense to me. But it sounds like you guys are having a really good conversation. So I just wanted to say I'm supportive, and thank you all for serving on the board.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We appreciate your support too. Christina, you have a little preservation 101 for us?
Well, I think that the challenges that the city of Palo Alto is facing are very similar to many communities, where with these concerns that property owners have about what it means to be a listed historic resource. We've worked with other cities, we did a kind of similar project in Mill Valley that ended last year and took a few years to take their previously identified historic resources. They didn't officially have an inventory, and resurvey them to confirm whether they should be on a local inventory. And we created a FAQ that was put up on the city's website. We had community meetings. I think it's important to educate and re-educate the public about the value of historic preservation and the potential incentives. I think for some other cities, Mills Act is definitely a big incentive for getting listed. I know that's the case in the city of San Francisco, where it's required to be a city landmark or listed in the California National Register to be able to then apply for the Mills Act. And so there are property owners who seek the designations with that end in mind. That's probably one of the strongest kinds of incentives, but certainly takes staff resources. There are kind of more rare communities that we've worked with that really value their historic resources. I'm thinking of Pacific Grove, where they had 1,400 properties on their local inventory, and we were hired to actually resurvey them because they had been put on decades ago. And we found that a number of them no longer retained enough integrity to be listed, and suggested that some of them be removed with future work for additional historic survey. And a lot of the community members were upset about removing properties because they saw the designation of so many individual properties as the way to preserve the character of their historic neighborhoods, which are very small scale. And there are actually other types of tools probably that could be used for what they were aiming for, other types of, broader neighborhood level protections. But they were kind of fixated on the idea of many individual properties being listed to prevent that kind of change. So I think there's a certain kind of mentality that needs to be developed within the community that understands not only about what it means to individual properties, but the community character, and that one of the things that people love about living in Palo Alto is not just their own house, but also the street that they live on and the neighborhood that they live on. That's so beautiful and has so much character, and trying to drive home those values to people who really aren't familiar with the concept of historic preservation through a variety of venues, whether it's a newsletter or regularly occurring public meetings, just for education purposes, might be the way to go to try to garner support for this type of project. There's always going to be those sticky homeowners who are the squeaky wheel and make things difficult. But you get a couple of those for a bunch of people who get on board. I think it's worth it.
Well, I don't know that you need to even get them on board. There's going to be differences of opinions, and, that's just life. So
if you can get 5 or 10% of the people to participate, I would call that a success.
Yeah. I mean, if you ask and they say yes to being on the inventory, is that what you're referring to, or something?
Or just, yeah, or a newsletter. I mean,
oh, I got you.
A public outreach, anyone who respond. I mean, I think you're going to get a small number, at least in the beginning, but.
There's definitely value in updating your surveys. Even the 1998 to 2000 is now 20 years old. As you found, some of those properties have been altered or demolished since then. We tend to recommend, if cities can do so, to update their surveys every 10 years or so as things change. So you're not alone in having some somewhat outdated information and trying to figure out how to deal with that. And I think most cities do try to take these in bite-sized chunks as you are able to obtain funding to survey certain certain neighborhoods or certain portions. So I think the approach of looking at these National Register eligible properties that were identified in that survey and re-surveying them to see if they should still be considered so is a really good first step towards this process of updating your information. And then that helps everybody. It helps the city to know what you have out there. What are the historic resources? It helps with broader city planning as well.
Sorry, a question in one ear, out the other. Forgot what I was thinking. Anybody else?
Well, I think while we're at it, we ought to try to create something that's lasting. I mean, we're using these artifacts from these previous surveys, PDFs, and going out and trying to check this list. But it seems to me this effort has had several iterations in the past, but there's never been a systemized way that we could, you talk about communities, you're encouraging them to do this every 10 years. Well, it'd be good if there was like a way to do that was known and agreed to and simply could be modified from decade to decade, as opposed to a group like this trying to start all over again every 20 years, because that just seems to be not very efficient to me. But just a thought.
Well, I think as we go along and add properties slowly to our inventory, I think we can define how to continue the process. I think we're going to learn a lot. I mean, I'm learning a lot already, but I think that by seeing how, there's going to be categories of people who react different ways. And I think if we kind of see, what areas, what buildings, how things kind of fall out across the city, I think it will teach us a lot of things. And maybe we do, one area of Palo Alto at one, in a 2-year span, and then another area in a 2-year span. Maybe it's something that kind of rotates, so it's consistent but never overwhelming.
Well, when the original Dames and Moore survey was undertaken, how was that funded? Was that specifically funded by council's approval for financing that?
I think the city did finance it. I'm not sure if we had a grant in conjunction with that or not.
Christina, just out of curiosity, I don't know if this is proprietary or not, but about what order of magnitude cost was that to Mill Valley to do that work that you were involved in?
It's a good question. We did the survey of 170 or so properties at the same time that we prepared a historic context statement for the city. I think the whole thing was maybe about $100,000, but half of that was the survey or something like that. There was a lot of public involvement to community meetings and hearings, and that takes a pretty good chunk of fee for consultants to also participate in. So something to keep in mind.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I think somehow we got to get some funding support behind some of these projects. Nothing's going to move forward without some money behind it. I don't know how you get to that point, convincing council to fund it or go through the planning department, see if they can break loose some money. But if you can't operate without any money, we're not going to be going anywhere. Getting these maps made, all this work requires money. We got to convince the council that we need some financial support on these efforts.
I would note regarding the 1998 survey, or I should say 1997 is when it began. I was not here, but I know that they made quite a bit of use of volunteers. And Caroline, you were, I think, around then and could vouch for that or verify that.
I can verify that, but I have little memory about it. But I do think it's kind of a fun. I mean, a lot of people like to look at old houses. It's like an activity, and now we all need to walk, and pandemic makes us need to walk more. And I think volunteers are a great, I don't think it would be hard to get a volunteer corps. We would need a coordinator, and I think maybe it's something we want to set up sort of aside from the the board. But I think that we have access to all the volunteer labor we need.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know we need money. Not
Yeah.
arguing that we don't need money, Mike.
I think this, you know, you're kind of kidding yourself. I think this needs to be done by professionals who are schooled in how to do these evaluations, and to send out a bunch of people that are marginally trained and have some marginal knowledge and trying to get these assessments is not really the proper way to go. I think you need to have one uniform body take a look at it in its entirety and get the proper funding. Just do the job the right way.
If I could jump in, I mean, I think it's actually a good year to make a budget request of council if you get it into this year's budget. I mean, I would suggest you guys forward that to council.
I was, Amy, we have a grant proposal mostly done for surveying the Eichler or mid-century housing in Palo Alto, don't we? But it's not been funded. Amy.
I can say that it has not been funded and it has not been submitted to the Office of Historic Preservation. This is the modern era context statement that has been on ICE, an application since when Emily Vance was here.
Sure. Okay. So is it possible to broaden the scope of that to include the discussion we're having today, or do we need to do just a separate proposal that would articulate what it is we're talking about now?
I would say it would be a separate grant proposal for resurveying the 1998 survey to see if those are, you know, the process that has commenced with the board members that ideally would involve a consultant.
Yeah.
And, you know, estimate the cost of that, which is, you know, not in our budget in the planning department.
You gotta have.
Also, I mean, I think with the National Register eligible properties, a lot of the work's been done. You know, yes, some of them got demolished, and that is something we need to verify. But you know, council's already paid for it. let's just move it forward. So you know, I think the expensive part has already been done, and I think we learned from this experience how we want to move forward and update the inventory that we have and add properties to the inventory. There's lots more steps to be had, but I feel like we've already done the majority of the work on this one, and we need to acknowledge that and thank council for, you know, having done that. But it's time to go to step 2. And I think part of the reason we haven't made it there is that the process has been, you know, the public thinks we're doing it and we think that they're doing it. You know, we expect them to come to us and say, oh, please put me on the inventory. And they think the inventory is something that's controlled by the Historic Resources Board. So I think we just need to get everything lined up. And I think at this point, we take ownership of it and we ask them if they want to be on the inventory. And some people will say yes, and a lot of people say no. And we will learn a lot in that process.
Just a quick question in terms of the start to finish to getting funding, Amy, how would you compare going after grants versus Tom suggesting this is a good year to go directly to to ask for city funds? Wouldn't city funds be something we could get potentially in hand quicker than going through a whole grant process?
Well, I don't want to paint a rosy picture, but we did just have the SB 9 ordinance adopted in December, and the council did ask staff to come back, you know, and we are coming back in, I think, March to let them know what it would take to place properties on the inventory, and, you know, money wise, staffing wise, because, you know, I'm not going to be able to devote my my 40 hours a week to this effort. There needs to be assistance from staff as well as consultant.
Okay, if that's the direction from the council, how do we best work with staff to get that ginned up and ready to go?
Well, you know, we do have an estimate from a consultant. We do have the ability to talk with our director as far as coming back with a proposal for council to consider and grant, you know, general fund monies to this. We also have, again, every May is when the applications for Office of Historic Preservation are due. So the idea that we would consider, you know, preparing a grant application that indicates how much money the city would put into something like that if we got the grant, you know, in kind, because you always have to kind of match with the Office of Historic Preservation grants. And again, Christine could verify that, but that's what I recall with our Professorville guidelines is that the city committed to, you know, staffing hours and funding. It was mostly in-kind staffing hours.
But a proposal to the council, not for grant, but for city funds, needs to be generated by the staff, correct? We don't do that. We can work with you to do that? Is that the correct process?
Yeah, so every year, as Councilmember Du Bois mentioned, there's, you know, an opportunity to request funding as part of the, you know, fiscal year funding budget. And that's the opportunity. So I can certainly.
What's the time on that for this year?
Well, I think it's happening now as far as putting together a budget request to the council. So I think that's why Du Bois was saying now is the time to put that in the budget request. So if we request $100,000, you know, coming from our director, that's, you know, explains why we want that. And that includes, you know, part-time staff person or something. That would be the method there.
Okay, so could we, at the conclusion of this meeting, could we, or soon know whether that you guys are, staff is going to commit to putting a draft of that together and when we might see it?
Certainly I can have a conversation with John, our director, when he returns next week about that, as well as our budget person. And certainly when we get to the next part of our retreat, which we should get to talk about the work plan, that is an opportunity as well, because we have to submit that to council.
Yeah, I think my prior recommendation, going back to funding of these efforts for the mapping project, I strongly recommended that you obtain funding and have it done by a professional and not try to overburden your in-house GIST staff to try to do this, which they probably aren't going to do anyways because they're too busy doing other things. But if we don't have the funding, we're just not going to go anywhere on these projects. We got to get a genuine proposal out, get it in front of council and get the money. Let's go it the right way, not try to shoestring this thing through some type of amateur type of approach.
Well, in listening to that, I think it would maybe, instead of passing this on to staff, maybe us as a board could come up with a very concise, this is precisely what we need. This is precisely how we want to go about doing it. And this is a precise estimate of how much money we feel like we need. I think we need to, I feel like some of this stuff is such a moving target. And I mean, I think Christian is right in saying, let's get this ball rolling. But I kind of feel like we need to verbalize it in a document that we're all a part of, just to really hone in on the actual scope and how we think that we can achieve our goal. I feel like we need to come up with some kind of a request for fund. I know there's a request for proposal, but a request for funds. And this is how we are going to allocate those funds, kind of more specifics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna be able to come up with those numbers, but sounds great.
Well, I know that we
Um,
can't come up with the dollar amount, but we
Yeah.
can guesstimate it
But
based
I think
on
it is
what
good. that-
Christina's
I think
provided.
as part of what Amy's doing, planning is doing, we can write a memo to council that has a brief history and what we want to do now. I mean, it's basically our work plan, but it's very focused on a few specific things rather than the Mills Act and, all of it. I think we should just focus in on updating the inventory and write a memo to council that and I think if we show we can get some things done, it'll be easier to get more done. So I think that I know it's hard to go in and not get everything we want all at once, but I think there's a lot to be said for, doing what you can now and building on that. And I think it'll build goodwill. I think it'll show that we're competent. And I say, let's move.
Okay, Amy, if we were to do that, how fast would we need to get that to staff? If we were to draft something up as a board along the lines that Margaret is suggesting? How quickly, given that this process, it sounds like from what you said, it's already started.
Yes, I don't know what date the council's budget considerations are, but definitely the sooner the better as far as a unified board recommendation or request or letter description. I think the sooner the better. I don't know I can't give you a deadline, but I'll certainly be talking with John next week following this.
Okay.
Out
If we don't do it, it's
We don't have months to do it though, do we?
No.
Okay, thank you.
if we don't do it, it's a lost opportunity.
Okay, so then the question is, how do we have a committee that's gonna write this memo? Or do we really literally all wanna weigh in?
Well, I suggest we not try to write it as an entire board. I think that's gonna be hard. I think there needs to be one or two or three people who take a lead on this, and it should be fairly straightforward.
Well, it should come from the chairperson of the board.
It has to be a subcommittee because more than 3 people, it would put us in violation of the Brown Act. So, subcommittee could be 2.
Okay, subcommittee, Christian volunteered, I'm volunteering.
I'm
Who's
happy
our
to
third?
help if needed.
Hold on here.
Okay, we got it. We'll do it next week.
Yeah, I can help.
Okay, and if anybody else has ideas of what we should include, then send them to one of us.
I can help with that too.
Yeah, what?
Why don't I come up with the first draft?
Oh, perfect, thank you. Great.
Oh, and so by the way, maybe this is a little backtracking. I was just looking at my computer and I see that I already created an outreach brochure, like back in 2017. It's already done.
Great.
It's like a trifold thing, and it was from us. It's I don't know. I'd love to share it with you guys.
Well, send it to Amy and she can, or do you want to screen share now?
I don't know if we have time. It's up to you. I can show you really quickly. I was just looking at it. Let me screen share just 2 seconds.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to do a time check because it's 10:12 and we were trying to get to the part two.
2 minutes, just 2 minutes, and I'll just show you really quickly. Can you see? I don't know where it is. Here, do you see that?
Yeah. Yes.
So it's a trifold, like you fold it here and here. I even formatted it and printed it out,
Oh, great.
But anyway, it has the City of Palo Alto Historic Preservation, I guess. This information is presented by the City of Palo Alto Historic Resources Board.
We can read it. Amy can send it to us, but will you scroll down so we can say, yeah.
And this is the second page. It's like
Oh,
bullet
great.
Points about.
Oh, I think that's a really good idea.
Well, actually, we were going to put these in the planning department where you just have
in the
them there.
libraries. I think that's great. So did it ever get printed?
I just printed a sample for myself, and I think I brought it to a meeting and handed it out.
Send it to Amy. I think it's a great idea.
I don't think I got any further than that, but
We would need something, Margaret, we would need something we can adjust because our department name has changed and the logo's changed and such.
oh yeah, this is back, I did this back in 17.
Yeah. So things have happened since then.
I know, boy, have they. I'll send it and then maybe we can maybe Amy can distribute it and you guys can comment on it.
Okay. Great. So Amy, should we move on to our work plan?
I'm going to share the current work plan, and then I'm going to go to the slides for our second part of our meeting. Keeping in mind we have a time we should check in at 10:30.
Okay.
I'm going to share the screen. Oops. Sorry. Okay, so we're at revisit the HRB work plan and our, I think that's where we'll be today. So we have our 2021 work plan, and you know, the council has asked for some kind of report that reviews the results of this, metrics of community involvement and participation. We have not done that work to consider that or just write something up about that. As you know, every year we do an annual CLG report, which we do review what happened in the prior year. So we can combine that effort in February. And then we have a 2022 work plan we need to create, you know, based on the 2021 things we haven't finished or ongoing activities. And then, you know, look at placing this on the work plan for, you know, updating the inventory. So these were some concepts about coming back over the next couple months to tackle some of the items that are on the current work plan. I'm going to show the current work plan now. This is what we submitted to council back in June. So you can see there's some items here that are just ongoing. Most of the items are ongoing. And so those can remain on the work plan because it's the work of the board. But then, you know, here's one that was looking at the second half of this fiscal year. So it's where we are now. And, you know, this flyer, the outreach, looking at our incentives, developing the work program upcoming, or, you know, starting in April. And then this was also appearing on here, the Mills Act. So this is our current work plan for the HRB. So noting that the next one is due in 2022 in April to the council. This was what we're talking about is adding this, implementing this comp plan that says nominating the deemed eligible resources, the National Register. So that could be added to the work plan. I don't know if anything is removed from the work plan, but certainly then the steps that, you know, go into that is, you know, requesting this assistant from the consultant, as well as some kind of staffing request to help with this effort. And then this outreach, which needs to be strategized, and you've started to do today. So that's what I have here. Does anyone want to have a conversation about our existing work plan and think about what we've accomplished in the past since June, I guess? Shall I leave this up on the screen? I don't think I sent this out in a presentation to the board.
It was sent this morning, but okay, I'm just vaguely finding this just depressing. So I think we should more focus on our work plan for the upcoming year. And then perhaps while we're in that positive mode, we can go back and sort of record where we are in our work plan, because I don't feel like there was a huge amount of progress, but I feel like we're on the verge of a lot of progress. So I think we need to focus more ahead than behind.
Carolyn, I'll tell you that I've been working on the Mills Act stuff. It's probably as far along as I have to have a conversation with Margaret, but it's as far along as we're going to be able to push it. Now, after, I think we can talk about it at our next meeting, and then move it to staff and figure out, Amy will have to figure out a way to get it beaten into shape. So that's more positive news than depressing news, I hope.
Good.
So we're looking at a February agenda for that. And also I'll just remind that I'll need to prepare our CLG report that we do every year. And that's, due soon as well. So that's my plan for what I will work on for the February agenda.
So you'll show us your CLG report before you submit it in February?
Yes, I'll present it to the board, and there can be comments on the report. I'll send it out in a report.
Okay.
We also have to give you our training information.
Yes.
Don't we?
Please, I will send out an email reminder, but please review over the past, so that the CLG report is always from October to September. So it's from October of 2020 to through September 2021, any of the trainings that you might have attended, if you can send those to me. And so part of this report is I send in everyone's bio, including mine. And the trainings that folks have done. And then I give a report on, properties that were elevated to a new category or put on the inventory or such like that. So that's February. And then we have, March. I think March is still an opportunity to finalize the work plan for 2022, the one that is due in April to council. So we can certainly talk about, I think what everyone's been talking about today is to add this to the work plan, even though it's not resourced or funded. So again, we're getting our hopes up, but I think things are happening without resources for now. Towards this effort.
Well, it's a request for resources to the council. So even though we don't have dollar amounts for it, it I think demonstrates to the council what we need resources to accomplish.
Yes. Okay, so is there a desire for some kind of straw poll, Chair Willis, on bringing back a work plan in February as well that adds this to the work plan, along with
I say definitely. Do we want a straw poll? I mean,
Can't we just add it now? I mean, do you want a motion? You want to make it stronger so that we take a recorded vote and say we would like to add this?
or should we just raise our hands if we support it? Is that a good way to do that?
Voice vote is what would happen. And when you say add it to the current work plan, that's the 2021, we would have to submit that to the council as an amendment to the 2021. The 2021 is kind of passed, so. No,
sorry, I misspoke. It's to make this our work plan for 2022, sorry.
So this item here, these items related to this inventory update could be added as another column and row to the 2021 work plan, because these are 3 ongoing, or this box here could be modified, because we already envisioned the second half of the year, the one that we're in now, fiscal year.
Yeah, right. It's complicated because the fiscal year is not the calendar year.
Correct. Well, we didn't know at the time we submitted in June that the council would be asking for them in April. I had thought we were going to be doing fiscal years, so that's why it says it this way. So it's a little confusing, but here we are in the second half of our fiscal year, which goes from July to July, and we're kind of in it here. So.
Well, I think this year we can respond in that develop work program box, but I think it really belongs in the inventory upgrades and nominations. And I think that should be a much more specific progression, you know, that we start here and move through, you know, upgrading the inventory itself, dealing with, you know, category upgrades, dealing with the Eichlers. I don't know that that's all going to be the work plan for the specific year, but I think it would be good for us to have a hierarchy of how we're going to move through it and let council know that we need to, you know, this is not a small project, that it's just the beginning of the project and we need to move through it, and we have made a commitment to move through it.
Okay, so I think what the board could just do a straw poll and request that I return in February with a modification to this work plan. It's probably a new row because this is basically when we get applications, which we don't for, except for commercial, for category upgrades and support nominations. So we could have another separate box that launches into the inventory upgrade that is.
Yeah, I think we should clarify. But are we going to do that? This is the work plan 2021. Are we talking about this one or the next one?
We're talking about the next one's needed to be worked on. And so if a straw poll sends me to come back at the February agenda with the 2022 draft work plan that shows another row about what we've been talking about regarding this, implement this comp plan program that we haven't started technically, I can do that.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do we need a motion to add the,
I have a lot of questions about this. This just seems, this work plan, it just feels like it's not going to get done as broadly as this brush is painted. At least it did last year. I'd be, and I don't want to throw a monkey wrench into this, but I'd be much more inclined to say, we take this current list we're working on and we combine that with the Mills Act incentives and the outreach as a pilot, and we do that. I have a lot of trouble separating those three things. I think the Mills Act is the only financial, is one of the only financial incentives available. A lot of the work's already been done. We already agreed on the outreach. We've already started on a list that those can be combined into one. And it's a pilot. It's a way of getting started with limited objectives that lead to larger objectives based on what the results are.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, because we're nearing 10:30, is perhaps I could have a chair and vice chair meeting prior to the February meeting to help me get a draft of a 2022 work plan. So we can set up a meeting to discuss that and then bring it back for the entire board to weigh in on.
Okay, thank you. And this is, I keep going back to David's description of this tour of the early tech companies that started here and thinking that's the moneymaker. That's the one that's going to draw a lot of people in, and that I don't want to bite off more than you chew, but of all the things that we talked about today, for the citizens of Palo Alto, if that thing was recreated and publicized, it would get a big audience. I think bigger than any audience for the current population of Palo Alto.
Maybe combine it with the music, you know, Bo Crane. I'm
Something
taking
like
us off
just
a
saying,
little bit, but he did the, sorry.
Any particular focus on historic locations where important things happen, that is by head and shoulders for a response from the citizens of Palo Alto and surrounding communities, I think is just an obvious one. So just.
It would be nice to have a walking tour of those music locations, the Grateful Dead, the
Right.
Journey.
Yeah. Oh, which, yeah, I'm just reading Janis Joplin's biography of New Margaret, and Palo Alto's all over it. And by the way, I was there, El Camino Park. So.
David, who did the tech tour?
Bo Crane, a past board member, created it.
I wonder if there's an outline or anything that exists from that.
I'm sure there is. It's a past product, so I'll follow up with Bo and Lee, board president, and see how we can leverage that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, what do you think, Amy? Are we good for today?
I think we've come to the end of our discussion for part 2 for today, and we'll look forward to reconvening in February. And does anyone have an issue with either of the dates in February? I'm thinking the first one might be doable with the things that we already have in front of us.
I'll be out of town on the 11th.
Okay.
Can you Zoom?
Difficult in Death Valley to get a cell signal of any kind.
I would have a planned absence on the 24th, and I won't have access to internet.
Okay, well, Mills Act, we need David. Okay, guess that answers our question.
Well, we will have a quorum, it sounds like, for the latter meeting.
Yes, we'd have a
And-
quorum either way, it looks like. But if we want to leave the Mills Act in February, I think we're stuck with the second meeting. But we could, I don't know. What I'd like is for everybody to get together on, moving the mapping ahead, moving the inventory ahead, our subcommittees. I'd like them to move along. And, I sort of would like us to reformulate ourselves into 3 two-person committees, and then I could kind of float and, tell you what you're doing wrong. No, but interact with all of them. And I still kind of like the format of the Mills Act, the inventory and the mapping. I said mapping. But I really think it would be a useful tool for us. So if we could all kind of assemble ourselves into 2-man groups, I think that would be the most efficient way to do it. And, that group can meet once a month, and then we could have our regular meetings once a month. So,
Caroline?
yes,
I've been looking at the mapping situation, and I'm willing to go ahead and start, colorizing a map of the city of Palo Alto. The problem I have is the scale of the map would have to be such that it's going to be, a 4-foot by 6-foot map. And using that tool, we could then go into the digital GIS system and do an overlay of that. But I would need to get a printout of the city properties. Is that possible to get?
We have zoning maps that are multiple pages with a key at the front, as is on the webpage. There's a key, and you click on each of the boxes. There, it's 1 through 13 or something. The smaller maps that's based on the the aggregate set that you click each of those boxes and you see.
But do you have a printout of just one large map to use as
no,
well?
you don't want one big one. You want to use sections. It's big enough.
Yeah, we have printed zone maps that have 13 pages or something like that.
Yeah.
For GIS, you may just need data, like a spreadsheet. And I think putting information on a paper map might be a step that's not necessary to then get it into a GIS map. If you
Right.
have the key information about addresses, APNs, and whatever else kind of qualifiers you're looking at in an Excel spreadsheet, that type of information could be imported into a GIS map.
So Amy, is that something we can ask Christina to do for us? Is that within our? If we gave
Well-
her the information, we should be able to come up with the information, right? The spreadsheet.
Yeah,
But
and this is
then
why working
It's
with
putting it
Roland-
into the GIS that we seem to be stopped on.
Yeah, so Christina is not enabled to manipulate our GIS
Okay.
system. That would be Roland
Okay.
and his.
We could
um,
potentially, if you wanted to use our resources, work with Roland on that. You know, we do have some GIS knowledge in our on my staff to provide the information in a format that could be then used in GIS.
So Christine, will you send me, or Amy, who can send me a list of what you need for, on the spreadsheet? You know, just to make sure that it, you know, we know what the categories are. And Christian, do you want to follow up on this one, or you want to? As far as putting it on the map?
I'd rather not. So.
Okay. Okay, so we're gonna go and Christina for now, right? Amy, is that okay? If we at least figure out how to do it with her?
Sure, we can use email. It's not a quorum of board members to continue this conversation past this retreat. I think we
Okay,
need to be mindful of time and
okay,
thing about historic preservation, there's so many directions, threads you can follow.
okay.
meeting.
Well, does anybody else have a subcommittee they're committed to? David, I assume you're Mills Act, right?
Yeah, Margaret and I think, can finish the Mills Act up. We started it.
Okay.
I'm interested in the inventory, but I know also I'm new, so I don't want to, you know, conflict with pre-existing.
No, I think that would be perfect because we can consult on that one. So Mike, what do you think?
What do I think about what?
Is there an area where you'd like to work? Or
Well-
we'll just hold on the mapping and maybe we can drag you back in where we need help later. I can do
Yeah.
that.
I think I've,
So we'll do the Mills Act and we'll do the inventory. And I'll work with staff on mapping. Okay? Any other thoughts on that? Okay. So schedule for February. We're gonna subcommittee meetings and meet the second Thursday. Is that right? Okay. So do we, no. I don't want to deal with the minutes right now, sorry. But I had a fair number of just corrections on them. If everybody could just send their corrections. Amy, do you want this, or is there somebody else on staff we could send this to?
Oh, Medina is the person who supports the
Medina.
board. Yeah, and if you don't have her spelling of her last name, it's Klicheva, K-L-I.
We have her email from this morning, so I think that's fine. So if you have, we have 2 sets of minutes. If you have corrections to them, if you could send them to Medina, and then we could approve them without going through everything. We probably
Well, we
wouldn't
can
have to-
continue the approval of minutes to your next meeting in
Yeah.
February.
So would we need a motion? So do I have a motion to delay?
I move to continue minutes, the approval of the minutes of the next meeting.
Thank you. In a second?
And I will conduct a vote. Chair Willis?
I always forget what to say. Yes.
Thank you. Vice Chair Peace?
Yes.
Board Member Bauer?
Yes,
Board Member Eggleston Sislevich?
Yes.
Board Member Hendrick?
Yes.
Board Member McKinnon?
yes,
Board Member Weimer?
Yes.
The motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. And board member comments, questions, or announcements quickly. I just have one thought. When I was surveying College Terrace, there's a lot of little courts. There was one that I was particularly enamored of that was on my list. I'm just wondering if we want to consider going out to owners of something like that that wouldn't necessarily, that would, I mean, just seemed at risk. They just seem at risk. If we can go out to them in conjunction with the Mills Act, if that's something we might want to, if we want to use the Mills Act a little differently and try and focus on certain types of properties. Is that legit? Or I'm just bringing it up in your Mills Act conversation. You can talk
Well,
about it.
if we had a Mills Act in Palo Alto, we could do that. I think the council has to approve it first. I don't think, Amy, they're going to approve anything, are they? They don't have any requirements for this.
Yeah, there's no Mills Act program in Palo Alto.
I know there's no Mills Act. And what I'm saying is that I would like to identify ways in which we could use it that would benefit the community. That was just one
No,
thing I
that's
thought, instead of giving it to some homeowner who's already bought his $12 million property and council is not going to be sympathetic to. I'll send the address to you guys and see if you think maybe that's some way we could apply the Mills Act, because to me, it just looked like why we'd want a Mills Act.
Well, that's what the Mills Act is intended to do. It's intended to preserve and restore historic properties at landscape. But at this point, there's no way that that's going to happen in Palo Alto because there is no Mills Act program.
You're going to fix that.
Yeah, we're getting there soon.
Okay. Any other comments or questions before we adjourn? Okay. Do I need a motion to adjourn the meeting too? Why do I not know these things? So does anybody want to move?
I move adjourn, we adjourn.
And a second?
I second it.
Thank you. And all in favor?
Aye.
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 And thank you all for going through this. And I hope we can have a lot more kind of mini sessions, study sessions, which is, I guess, more what it was than a retreat. But I'm glad to see we're kind of all at least starting to move, and hopefully we can get a few things done in 2022. I'm optimistic. I know it's a weird history, but I'm feeling confident you guys can do it.
Good. Nice to
Thank
see you
you.
all.
And thank you for joining us,
Here.
Christina.
Right.
Here.
Well,
Good to
welcome
see
to
you.
Alyssa. Welcome to Alyssa.
Oh, yes,
Thank you, yeah.
definitely great to have you with us. Thank you.
And thanks to Christina for joining us today.
My
Right.
pleasure.
Okay.
Great to
Bye
see you
all.
all.
Bye.
Bye.